You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. He is Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. He does great stuff for them. And hey, Ole Miss's interviews today. Today was Coordinators Day, but you're not going to get to see that on YouTube because of corrupt files. So Michael Katz is going to be our window inside of that room. How you doing, buddy?
That's dangerous. I could just make it all up and no one would ever know.
Not a thing. Although we kind of get an idea of something that Pete would say, and we kind of know that Charlie would be kind of awkward in front of a microphone. We can go from there. We can probably make out what was said.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do that. I'm too honest. I told myself.
Yeah. Yes. It was pretty good. But it would Pete Golding, he came up and everybody talked about you and David Eckert both. It was like, hey, we got a couple of good sound bites. He dropped a cuss word or two. He mentioned getting his tail whipped, typical defensive coordinator stuff. And then you got 20 minutes of football. He is such a football guy.
No, he is. It's really, we get to talk to him at once a year for sure. It's always this time of year. And then depending on the bowl game, the bowl will make them the coordinators talk. But other than that, we don't get to talk to Pete or Charlie. So, last time we saw Pete was in Atlanta, and we just like sat around like tables with him, and just like he's a super funny guy, but he's also just like he's really, really smart and just understands things and is really good at breaking them down for people who aren't like I know football, but I'm not learning the playbook, X's and O's and stuff. And he has a really good way of breaking things down so that you can understand it too. And so, 20 minutes with Pete. And yeah, there were a couple of things that would probably have had to been bleeped out from the video had it existed. But no, he is the ultimate football guy. Just like the second he left, literally, we all looked at each other and we were like, this dude rules.
Yeah, it's great. And you mentioned talking to you and making you explain it. You can see why he is a good defensive coach, because if he can do that to you, what is he doing to them?
Exactly. I mean, when you ask him a question about, someone, Prince Leamon dropping back in coverage, he explains it in a way that it makes sense to everybody in that room. You're like, oh, okay, like this actually does make sense why he's doing it. Or Suntarine Perkins and how he's using him. He just has a really good way of making it all make sense.
Yeah, and I'm kind of impressed. He really likes his defensive line. I get. He compared Walter Nolen to Quinnen Williams, and that is some heady stuff right there.
Yeah, no, it was funny because somebody asked, what have you liked out of Walter Nolen so far? And he kind of stood there for a second. He like tapped the podium. He was like, what isn't there to like? And then he actually answered in earnest. And the thing he said was, his get off and his ability off the ball was like Quinnen Williams, who of course was an All-American, is an All-Pro in the NFL right now, was the third pick in the draft a few years back, whatever it was. He called him a twitchy guy, a 3-down player, just everything you could possibly want to hear from the 5-star guy you got in the portal. You got it all right there from him today.
Yeah, and it was really interesting talking about how the defensive line is set up. I think the roster weights came out, and you had Cam Franklin. He got to camp at 6'5", 275. William Eccles is up over 315. The weights on the roster, it definitely feels like it was intentional.
Oh, wow, 100%. And Pete said that, again, the focus, a lot of it today was the front, because that's been the focus for a lot of the offseason. But he said they've got 8 or 9 guys who they feel they're going to be able to rotate during games. And when you're playing the Georgias of the world, if you don't have depth, you see what happened last year. Like, that's what happens. But when you have a bunch of guys, and, he was asked about which freshman, he brought up Eccles, he brought up Franklin. Eccles, he said, was the guy who he's exactly what they thought he was. Had really high praise for Franklin too. Those are guys who, like, yeah, they're young, but their bodies are ready for that. And so he seemed extremely excited about that group. And honestly, you know, it's hard to blame him.
Yeah, 3 years ago, those guys would have had to play this year.
100%. It's great. No, it's kind of insane to look. And you know, Lane has said it, and it's been like the whole theme over the last week is we look like a team now. But like, I mean, these are legitimate like SEC contending fronts now.
Did Pete mention that Georgia game at all?
Oh yes, he did, and that's where it always goes, right? That's like always the conversations, like where you have to start. But he actually had an interesting sort of aside to that, and like obviously we talked about it a million times, like the length and athleticism, like that was one of the big messages, right? But he also said when you're looking for guys, you need, like, they wanted SEC guys who had already played in the SEC because he felt in that game they had a different look in their eyes, like they weren't quite ready for that moment. And you know, now they are, like they've had that moment. But now when you bring in guys like Princely and Walter Nolen, these are guys who have played high-level SEC games who aren't going to be like phased by the environments or anything like that. Like I think what Pete wants is like they just want it to be another game. And yeah, it's a big game, but the more you can think of it as just another game, the better. And so I thought that was really interesting too, of looking for big game guys, obviously the talent, but guys who have played in these big games. So, you know, you're not caught off guard in the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And don't worry, everybody, we're going to get to today's practice, but you only get the coordinators every so often, so you have to talk about them a little bit as well. Moving on over to Charlie Weis, did he have anything interesting to say, especially with all these new toys that he has?
Yeah, so I mean, the question, you know, the big ones are, you know, what's the next step for Jaxson Dart? That's like the big one. It's, you know, it's a lot of he's obviously everybody's complimentary of Jaxson, and it's, you know, last year, actually, he did say something interesting. He said last year the focus was really getting his footwork down and working on that sort of stuff. Now it's, you know, getting more comfortable with coverages and all that sort of stuff. The headliners, I guess, were what's the running back situation going to be? Because that's, you know, obviously it's been one way the last couple of years, and before that it was very different, and it looks one way now compared to how it had been the last couple of years. But you know, Lane was a little like non-committal in terms of you know, he was asked that question. He said, I don't really care how it ends up, just as, you know, it'll work itself out. They're going to run the ball regardless. You know, Charlie made it sound a little bit more like, yeah, we sort of understand we might not have the workhorse guy right now, the guy who's going to get, you know, the Quinshawn level carries. But they got a lot of guys who can do a lot of different things. And he brought up Amos being a power guy, Parrish being a guy who he's not huge, but he's, you know, he gets through the line. He's good up the middle. And then of course, Bentley is somebody who's just extremely explosive and can make plays in space. And so, you know, and again, it remains to be seen. Maybe Ulysses Bentley ends up leading the pack, who knows, but Charlie made it sound at least a little bit more like we all sort of have been talking about, like the group effort sort of thing.
Yeah. And did he mention the helmet technology or anything like that in his press conference?
Yeah, a little bit. That was that was a part of it today. And it was actually interesting talking with Pete about it too, because obviously they're going to have somebody who is going to be wearing it. And they're not sure who it's going to be quite yet, because they've got a lot of guys competing at linebacker for that spot. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, you look at the side for plays, and then the defense would have a second to look at the sideline for, you know, the play calls. And now it's go, except, you know, the secondary is still going to be looking at the sideline because they're not going to be able to hear what, you know, the linebacker is saying because they're too far back. So there's like a lot of really interesting moving pieces, I think, in terms of how that's going to work. I mean, Pete used a very a choice word when describing the helmet communications. And this is not my word. He said shit show. Just when talking about like how, you know, the management of it, and like, you know, if you've got a bunch of guys wearing, like, only one person on the field can have it at once, but like, what if you've got guys on special teams who all are wearing like the tech because they're going in at different times that only everybody's got like switch helmets, and he was, there's a lot of like logistical things with it. It was really interesting to kind of pick their brains on that.
Yeah. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. When we come back, we will get to today's practice and talk with Michael Katz about that. And we'll talk about the lead that we actually buried, and that is what Suntarine Perkins might be doing this fall for Ole Miss. So stick around for that. Right now, I do want to let you know that Game Time is your place to get Ole Miss tickets. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. There's not a bad seat in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, but even so, you can check on the site and see exactly what the view from that seat will be before you buy them. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all of that stuff. You can take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss football tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with getting tickets as well. So do this. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. So Michael was out at practice today, and what all did you see? What was it? A shells? Was it full pads? What was the look? What stood out to you?
I think it was full pads. I spent half of the day trying to figure out where the linebackers were because we just couldn't find them. So Dave Eckert and I were just literally looking around, and we were asking everybody do you see the linebackers? So I don't know. I'm sure they're there. I'm sure they exist. Maybe they were inside for a bit. But that was one of my big things, was trying to figure out where everybody was. But we were out there. It was outside. We were outside today and for the whole time, or for the part that we were there for, 20, 25, 30, whatever it was minutes. We're not seeing a lot of the, let's say a lot of the strategy sort of stuff. We're seeing a lot of drills and one-on-ones and, stuff like that. But I guess if you're looking for good things, Nate Kalepa was dressed. He hadn't been dressed, at least when he started last week. He was in a black jersey, so he was practicing. And so it's one of those things where you sort of go out there to say you were out there, but it's just not a ton to be learned right now, other than who's healthy and who's not.
And from the looks of it, they mostly are. The big injury has not happened in fall camp, to our knowledge. There hasn't been a CJ Baxter or Montreal Jordan out there.
Yeah, there's guys who are obviously wearing black jerseys, but they're working out on the side, doing individual, footwork or riding the bike or whatever it is. So it doesn't seem like anything is particularly serious. And again, you see what happened at Texas yesterday. It can happen at that when you least expect it. So so far so good.
Yeah. Well, the main takeaway today, we really, really buried the lead in this one. We're 13 and a half minutes in, and we're talking about this. But Pete Golding talked about Suntarine Perkins as being a Swiss Army knife and playing multiple positions on this defense. And perhaps, just perhaps, you looking for the linebackers, you couldn't find them because him and TJ Daugherty was off with Pete Golding learning different stuffs, and they're putting together their cauldron and their mixture for Warlock Golding.
That was my question. Was it's been interesting to see sort of the transition that at least from our perspective that Suntarine has gone through, because he comes in as I don't want to say a standard linebacker, but you thought you knew what you're going to get, and then he's playing on the edge a lot, and then he gets officially moved to defensive end on the roster, and you look and he's 205 pounds. You're like, ooh, how does that work? And so I asked Pete what makes him right for that spot, and I think that like labeling him as a defensive end probably isn't like the right term, because I think he is going to be all over the place as a hybrid guy. But you know, it's the athleticism that he has that allows you to let him be that chess piece. So I know a lot of people have been wondering, like, what do you do with the guy who was one of the prize recruits you've had in quite a while? And it sounds like, you know, if anybody's going to know like how to get the most out of him, because like Pete Golding has done this forever. Pete Golding knows how to get guys in the right spot. And it sounds like there's going to be like a lot of spots for him. You know, I don't think he's just going to be an edge rusher. I think he is going to come off the edge a lot, but I think he's going to drop back in coverage. He's probably going to play in the middle. He's going to do everything. And I think that, you know, an athlete like that, you just got to use him wherever you can.
Now, obviously, that's a good sign because Pete Golding thinks he can handle it, because that's a lot of information in this defense, which is not easy.
And that's what he says, that last year they were just trying to focus him on one thing because they didn't want to overwhelm him with all of these different concepts. But now that he's comfortable, he's been here, you can start to let him, you know, do all these different things because he knows the playbook now.
You know, it's really interesting. I think that Pete Golding, one of the things that he has is to not do what LSU did with Harold Perkins a year ago. That's what they're trying to avoid right now.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if they had let Perkins like be in different spots on the defense, that would have probably been fine if you had actually moved him around, but you don't want to put him in the wrong place and just keep him there. Mm-hmm. Let him be an athlete, let him go wherever you're going to be able to use him. And so I think people get scared when you talk about position changes and putting a guy into a spot that you haven't seen. So like when you say defensive end Suntarine Perkins, people go, oh no, what are they doing? But I think at least with this situation, he's not going to line up an end all the time. He's going to be all over the place. Again, he's a chess piece.
Yes, and you will see him. Well, he's like a backup for Princely Amamielin at the jack position, which is by itself a hybrid defensive end linebacker. Mm-hmm. But I also think he's going to play some standard 4-3 type stuff for the other outside backers. And I think they're going to do some stuff. I don't know about this particularly, and it hasn't been said to me, but I think that Pete Golding is going to do some stuff with him and TJ Daugherty together. They're working in concert. So I do think it'll be interesting to see what Suntarine Perkins does, starting with Furman, honestly.
I mean, you have elite athletes at those spots now. You can do just so many different things that, and again, no disrespect to the guys before, they did a nice job, but you have a different level of athlete there now.
Yeah, should be pretty good. Yeah, you've got Quinnen Williams up front. Good grief. When I cannot believe that Pete Golding made that comparison, because he's potentially the most dominant SEC defensive lineman that has come through in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I was looking down. I think I was typing and my ears just perked up. I was like, ooh, that's a hell of a name. That's a hell of a name drop.
Yeah. So when you look at this defense and you look at the defensive line specifically, do you think that the defensive line that they want to trot out to begin, Amon Ellen, Walter Nolen, J.J. Pegues, Jared Ivey?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one that makes the most sense. I don't think anything can go wrong from that. But I think as they get into different matchups, maybe they, start changing the fronts and they start putting more guys back in linebacker flex spots. But I mean, if I had to guess, that would be the standard, 4-man thing right now. But again, I don't think Eccles and Franklin are probably going to start against Furman, but I think that those are guys who are going to get a decent amount of reps too.
Yeah, and Jared Ivey up at 285.
Yeah, I actually was just thinking he looked huge today.
Yeah, I mean that. For people that don't know, that's a 3-4-5 technique. Whenever a 3-4 defensive end, like the Marcus Spears type defensive end, for people that are my age, that means more flexibility on this defense. Pete is completely building this up to do a ton of different stuff. And I genuinely think Ole Miss is going to run some 3-3 stack stuff, which is a Zach Arnett specialty, because Lane Kiffin mentioned what he did and the trouble that caused. I think that is a little bit of the building up size-wise as well.
No, I mean, and again, the more looks that you can give the better spot you're going to be in.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. What do you got going on this week, bud?
Just working through some of the coordinator stuff. I wrote about Pete Golding today. Going to do Charlie Weis tomorrow, and still got some leftover player interviews from Media Day from a couple weeks, or I guess it was last week. So a lot of good stuff. Fortunately, we're still a few weeks out, so I've got some time to empty the holster, but some good stuff on the way.
All right, check his stuff out at the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Michael L. Katz, is that your Twitter handle? Yes. Check that out as well. It's a great follow for everyone. So anyway, Michael, take care, buddy, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.